Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the first executive branch lecture. So just to give you guys kind of a heads up, this lecture is not going to be quite as long, and that's due simply to kind of the time constraint that we are placed under. We don't meet as often as we would under normal circumstances, and there's not a ton of time left in the semester. So it's not going to be necessarily as long as previous lectures, but there is still going to be quite a bit of information in here. And once again, please do take notes when we do come across the assessment for the executive and judicial branches, which could very likely be our final. I will allow you guys to use notes on that assessment. And so once again, just like the previous assessments, most of the information or questions from the assessment are going to be based off of my lectures. So to begin with, let's start with the qualifications. And so immediately, one unique and distinct qualification for the presidency is that any individual who wants to become elected president, they must be a naturalized born U.S. citizen. So that means they must have been born in the United States or any on U.S. territory. So if there is a family that is stationed overseas and then a child is born on an overseas military base, that's still U.S. soil. And so even though they weren't born in the United States, in the 50 states, they would still be, they could still run for president. But this is not a stipulation for being a judge or being a congressman or a U.S. senator. You can be an immigrant and you can immigrate over here and you can become a senator, you can become a congressman, you can even become a governor of a state. So for example, probably one of the most famous governors who was an immigrant was Arnold Schwarzenegger. So he was born in Austria, he moved over to the United States, he lived here for decades, and then eventually he became governor of California. So Mr. Schwarzenegger would not be eligible to be a United States president, even though he was a governor of a state, due to the fact that he was not born in the United States. So besides being born in the United States, you must be at least 35 years old to be president. You have to have lived or resided in the United States for 14 years. A presidential term is 4 years long. That is stipulated by the Constitution. However, originally, the Constitution did not stipulate term limits. There was a tradition of 2 term limits, and this was set by George Washington himself. So he was not confined to term limits. He simply did not, he thought that one man should not hold power for too long. But it was never a law in the United States that a president may only serve 2 terms until after President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And so he was actually elected 4 times to the presidency. He ended up passing in office, but this was nice to see that it was bipartisan support. So it was Democrats and Republicans that looked at the 4 terms. Not that President Roosevelt had done anything wrong, but there was this kind of agreement. Look, there had always been a tradition of 2 terms. It was extreme circumstances with the Great Depression and then immediately followed by World War II. And so Roosevelt did not stick to that tradition, but afterwards, the members from the Democrats and the Republicans, quite intelligently, in my opinion, amended the Constitution, and the 22nd Amendment later stated that a president can only serve 2 terms as president in the United States. So the executive branch it's made up of the president, the vice president, and the cabinet. So once again, the assignment that you guys did on Monday, that was called A Very Big Branch. It kind of exposed you guys to the cabinets. And so, like I said, like I told you on Monday, the goal of that assignment was to illustrate to you guys that the executive branch is a massive branch. It is not just the president and the vice president, but it is the entire executive cabinet, all the departments and then the agencies that fall underneath those cabinets and then are created by Congress. So underneath the president, we have his cabinet, which is the 15 heads of the executive departments. So all the secretaries of the departments and the attorney generals. You have federal agencies. So you have, for example, the Central Intelligence Agency. You have the Federal Bureau of Investigations, or the FBI and the CIA. You have the NSA, you have the EPA, you have a bunch of different agencies. Those all fall under the executive branch. And then, like I said, you have the vice president, who is also considered a member of the president's cabinet. So the executive departments. Each department has a specific responsibility that is outlined for them. Departments are created by Congress, but they work for the executive. However, Congress can also eliminate departments. So they have this, it's a kind of a way to introduce checks and balances once again. So to not give too much power to one branch of government, Congress has the authority to create departments for the executive branch, but they also have the authority and power to eliminate those departments if they feel that need is required. The newest department that we have is the Department of Homeland Security. It was created in the aftermath of 9/11. And the responsibility of cabinet or the cabinet and the secretaries is to advise the presidents and help him implement federal laws in the areas where those departments have responsibility. So I know that President-elect Biden is not the president yet, but we are a matter of weeks, I think about 2 weeks away from him being sworn into office. And so I've replaced all the department heads from Trump appointees to the Biden nominations that have been listed, although he has not nominated a secretary for every single cabinet position thus far. But something that is historic about Biden's cabinet so far is that it is the most diverse cabinet in the United States history of presidential cabinets. This was something that he had said during the campaign, and so far he really seems to have followed through on that promise on making his cabinet the most diverse in presidential history. So for the Department of State, he nominated Antony Blinken. This wasn't too much of a surprise. Blinken worked for President-elect Biden when he was vice president under Obama. There wasn't necessarily anything historic about Blinken being nominated to Secretary of State. However, for Department of Defense, President-elect Biden nominated General Lloyd Austin. This is a historic nomination, although it's not for sure that he will get confirmed. And ironically enough, he may find the most difficulty getting confirmed from Democrats, not from Republicans. And so General Austin, the reason why this would be a historic nomination is because he would be the first African American to lead the Department of Defense. He was a general under Obama. During Obama's presidency. And the reason why that I had stated that Biden may receive the most pushback from Democrats is because several Democrats voted against President Trump's first defense secretary because there is a regulation that states, or law that states, that you must be out of the military, you must have retired from the military for 7 years before you can be eligible to be a Secretary of Defense. And so the reasoning for this is because we want to ensure that a civilian has control of our military, not a general. And so that way, the military is always responsive to the civilian government, not to a general. And General Austin has only been out of the military for 4 or 5 years, so he does not meet that threshold. And so it will be interesting to see how those Democrats who voted against General Mattis for Trump, how many of those Democrats that voted against General Mattis will vote against or for General Austin? Department of Justice, actually just earlier today, within the last couple of hours, Biden has nominated Merrick Garland. And so what's interesting about Merrick Garland is that Merrick Garland is the man that was nominated by President Obama to replace Justice Scalia on the Supreme Court when Scalia passed away. And Garland was not even given a hearing by the Republicans who were in control of the Senate at the time. And so that very individual, Merrick Garland, who was supposed to have, at the very least, in theory, have gotten a hearing and potentially ended up on the Supreme Court, could very likely now be the next Attorney General, especially given the fact what we saw happen in Georgia yesterday and today, which is that in a historically red state, Georgia has historically been very conservative. They actually, in November, voted for Biden, the Democrat. And what we saw happen last night, and which was confirmed today, as far as I know, both of the races in the Georgia Senate runoff races have been called for both of the Democrats. Democrat Warnock, Reverend Warnock, and Jon Ossoff have both been declared winners in the Georgia Senate runoffs, which is a massive deal because now the Senate is split 50-50. There are 50 Democrats, there are 50 Republicans, which means the tiebreaker goes to the vice president, which is going to be Kamala Harris. And so the Democrats now have control of, they have the trifecta. So they have control of the House, although by a much slimmer majority. I think it's only by only 5 seats. So that's not a lot of control of the House. And same thing with the Senate. It is 50-50. And so the only reason why they control the Senate is because the tie-breaking vote is the vice president. So for the Department of the Interior, this is another historic nomination. This is a Congresswoman, Haaland. And so even though she has a Norwegian last name, she is actually a Native American. She has a Native American mother, or had a Native American mother, and had a Norwegian father. And so she is the first Native American that has ever been nominated to the for a president's cabinet. And then once again, because those 2 Senate runoff races in Georgia went Democrat, both of them, the chances of these individuals being confirmed is significantly higher. Department of Treasury, once again, this is a historic nomination. President-elect Biden nominated Janet Yellen, who was the head of the Fed under Obama. And so she will be, if confirmed, which will most likely occur, she will be the first woman to ever lead the Department of the Treasury. Department of Health and Human Services, it was kind of a surprising nomination. President-elect Biden nominated the Attorney General from the state of California. As far as I know, there isn't, I don't think this is historic. He may be the first Hispanic to run Health and Human Services, but I don't think so. But anyway, the next one, Department of Transportation. Once again, this is a historic nomination by President-elect Biden. Pete Buttigieg, who was a nominee for the Democratic presidential candidate, is the first openly gay cabinet nominee. So if confirmed, he will be the first openly gay cabinet secretary. Department of Education, he named the top education official from Connecticut, I believe it was. To my understanding, I don't think there's anything historic about this nomination or nominee. He is not. Biden has not yet nominated anyone for the Department of Labor. The Department of Veterans Affairs, once again, this is another Obama era appointee. I think he ran the VA under Obama as well. Department of Housing and Urban Development. I believe this is historic, although I'm not quite sure. This is a congresswoman. So she served in the House of Representatives, although she may be the first African-American female, although she is not the first African-American to run housing and urban development. Department of Energy is the former governor of Michigan. Once again, I don't think there's anything quite historic about the Department of Energy pick. There's no pick yet or there's no nominee, no name named yet for Commerce. Department of Agriculture is a gentleman named Vilsack, who is from Iowa. He ran the Department of Agriculture under Obama. Having someone from Iowa run the Department of Agriculture makes sense. And then last but not least, Department of Homeland Security. Once again, this is a historic nomination because this would be the first Hispanic running the Department of Homeland Security. So the line of succession, we have had 8 times in our history we have had a president die in office, and we have had one president resign from the presidency. So in each case, as the Constitution stipulates, the vice president takes the oath of office and then becomes the president. So the line of succession for the presidency is, first it is the vice president, then it goes to the Speaker of the House, then it goes to the Speaker pro tempore of the Senate, and then after that, so after it goes from the vice president to the leader of the House to the president of the Senate, it then goes to the heads of the departments in the order that they were created. Like I said, though, the furthest that we have ever gone is we've only ever gone to the vice president. We've never had to go to the Speaker of the House, the president of the Senate, or heads of departments. So presidential powers and roles. So in Federalist Paper number 70, Hamilton argues for one strong executive. There was some debate when ratifying the Constitution as to who should be the executive, how many should there be, how should the executive be selected. And so part of the reason why Hamilton argues, once again, in my opinion, intelligently, argues for one executive is because there are times where we need a decisive decision to be implemented immediately, especially in times of emergency. And the more people you have, the more difficult it is to come to a consensus. If you just have one individual, then it's not difficult to come to a consensus. So the Constitution did eventually settle on one single president. The president has both formal and informal powers. So formal powers are specifically stated in the Constitution. Informal powers are not necessarily explicitly stated, but they are used to fulfill the duties of the office. And so the duties of the office really can fall under 5 categories. The chief executive, the chief diplomat, the commander-in-chief, and then the legislative leader, and then the party leader. So the chief executive. The president carries out the laws of the nation and is tasked with enforcing the laws of the nation. He oversees the agencies and all of the bureaucracies. Secretaries of those bureaucracies or of those departments advise the president and are the link between the president and the bureaucracy. And all of those secretaries must be confirmed by the Senate. Once again, this is a check and balance so that the president can't just nominate whatever loyalist they want. The Senate must confirm that individual. Secretaries are most often politically aligned with the president. And unlike most federal employees, the secretaries of departments typically leave as a new administration is coming into office. Sometimes they linger for a while until the next secretary is confirmed, and on some occasions, so for example, with President Obama, he actually kept on the Secretary of Defense that was left over from Bush. He asked the Bush Secretary of Defense, Robert Gates, to stick around, and I think Gates stuck around for the first 3 or 4 years of President Obama's term, although that is not typical. Usually Democrats and Republicans do not hold on to previous secretaries from the previous administration, especially if that previous administration is from the opposing party. So the president's cabinet consists of 15 secretaries of departments and the vice president. We've already kind of gone over what the departments are. Like I said, the secretaries and heads of agencies, they advise the president on whatever their area is. So for example, the FBI or the Department of Justice will advise the president on matters relating to domestic affairs. The CIA will advise and give information to the president about what's going on outside the borders of the United States, and so forth and so on. Conflict can arise between secretaries and the president. Sometimes secretaries almost try and go their own way, and sometimes these conflicts become public. Something that was quite unusual about the Trump presidency is how public these contentions would be. President Trump has publicly tweeted negatively and attacked his own, a couple of his his Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson. He went after him on Twitter. He went after General Mattis, which was his first Secretary of Defense. He went after his second Secretary of Defense. He publicly went after his second Attorney General. And so this was something that was quite unusual for the president to, and the cabinet, for the issues between the cabinet members and the president to become so public. So the part of the being chief executive is nominating. There are approximately 1,000 appointed positions that must be confirmed by the Senate. Obviously, the president doesn't have 1,000 people in mind, or probably even know every single position that needs to be filled. And so this is oftentimes where the party will come in, and the party can influence the president as to who to nominate for judgeships or for federal positions or agencies. So the chief diplomat, so the president is also the top diplomat for the United States and is in charge of forming U.S. foreign policy and interacting with heads of state. The president is authorized to make treaties with foreign heads of state and with foreign governments. They have the authority to appoint ambassadors and to receive ambassadors and public ministers. But once again, this is where there's a check and a balance. We'll get to it later in the lecture. The Senate must approve of all the treaties and all the appointments of ambassadors and judges. Once again, the president cannot just appoint whomever they want to. Diplomacy can involve state dinners. Or in some cases, like with the case of Obama, when he was hosting the British Prime Minister, David Cameron, he got him courtside seats both of them had courtside seats at an NCAA basketball game. Oftentimes, what presidents do with heads of state is it's very typical to play golf with foreign heads of state. So the chief legislature. The president plays a role in legislation. So although hopefully you guys can remember from our legislative branch lecture, the only individuals who can introduce bills are members of Congress. So you must be a representative or a senator. The president themselves cannot introduce a bill to Congress. Now, with saying that, they have a tremendous influence and can encourage members of Congress to introduce a bill that he wants and that he can be a part of, or at least elements of the White House are involved in shaping and forming a bill. In order for a bill to become a law, a president must sign the bill. There is a veto power, so the president can also veto a bill, although it can be overridden. There's also something referred to as a pocket veto. So this does not occur very often, but it was very, very close to occurring a couple of weeks ago. And it almost occurred with the second relief package that Congress had passed. And so it had been passed by the House, it had been passed by the Senate. There was even the White House representative who had agreed and said, yes, the president will sign off on this. And kind of out of nowhere, President Trump recorded a video where he basically said, I'm not going to sign this bill into law. And so what a pocket veto is, it's an informal veto that the president can do where he doesn't veto the law. He basically just lets it sit there. And if Congress adjourns within that 10-day period, because if a president does not veto a law, after 10 days, if Congress is still in session, it becomes a law. If the president does not touch the bill and Congress adjourns and the congressional session expires and the president does not sign the bill into law, then it does not become a law. And that is what happened from December into January. Congress was going to adjourn, the session was going to expire within the 10 days. And so they would not have the opportunity to override the veto, and it would not come into law because Congress's session was going to expire. And so that was really close to happening. However, eventually Trump, I think the pressure did get to him, and I think his aides got to him and said, look, you need to sign this bill. This was bipartisan. We had Democrats, we had Republicans who agreed on this. We told Congress that we would sign this, and eventually President Trump did sign the bill. So another way that the president influences policy is with the State of the Union address. So oftentimes the president uses the State of the Union address to encourage Congress to pass key legislation. The presidents will also work, like as I've stated, with party leaders to shape the legislative agenda. It's also to kind of publicly explain or to convey to the public how the country is doing, where the president sees the country can improve, and where they want to go. So it's a speech that is given every year to Congress, and it's not just Congress. So it is all members of the House of Representatives, all 435 representatives, all 100 senators, and then you have all 9 members of the Supreme Court. And so and then you have 14 members of the president's cabinet. So there is always one member from the cabinet who does not attend the State of the Union address. And I will play you guys a video that will show why there's always one member who does not attend.
There are times when we make history, and there are times when history makes us. This is a crucial moment for our nation. And America's colors burn brightest when we meet challenges head on. For far too long, the wealthiest 1% have seen their fortunes only grow, while the rest of the nation lies in worry. That needs to change.
The question is, how do we pay for it?
But the question is, how do we pay for it?
It's not even in the vicinity of what we agreed on. No, this is not a quid pro quo. This is you do what I say when I say it, or you suffer the consequences. It's beyond that. Penny, you need to go to sleep right now.
Let me talk to her.
No, you can't talk to Dad.
Let me talk to her.
And not just here at home.
Hello?
Hi, Daddy.
Who is this?
It's Penny.
Penny who?
Penny Kirkman, your daughter.
No, that's not possible. My daughter's asleep, and I know that because I kissed her goodnight almost 2 hours ago.
When are you and Mommy coming home?
It doesn't matter. You're going to be asleep by then, right? Right?
She can't keep going this.
I've got an idea. What if you go to bed right now, and I let you stay up an extra hour tomorrow night so we could hang out? Sound like a deal?
Deal.
That's my girl. Give me a kiss.
Good night, Daddy.
Good night, little P. See? All good.
Not all good.
What do you mean, not all good?
Tom, you can't do that. You can't make promises that you won't be able to keep.
We're in Washington. They're the only promises we're allowed to make.
You know, you need to learn how to set some limits with her. Because if not, she is going to walk all over you.
I know. You're right.
Values that we hold dear, that represent who we are.
Here come the greatest hits.
To ensure you that the same American dream, shared by our fathers, our mothers, and their fathers, and
It's weird.
That's what garlic is.
Is it?
We'll come back on. See if you can get it to work. Yeah. No, I know. Ours just went black, too.
Tom? Oh my God.
I'll get back to you. Mr. Secretary, you need to put the phone down. Mike, what the hell is going on?
I said put the phone down.
Okay.
We've lost contact with the Capitol. We're sheltering in place until we know more. I need your government-issued BlackBerry.
What?
Do you have any other devices on you? Please check your bag.
So we're getting reports of some kind of explosion in or around the Capitol building. We're still
Mr. Secretary, get away from the window, now!
So that's certainly how you start the opening scene of a show. So the show is called Designated Survivor. But so the reason why we have one, or what is referred to as the designated survivor, we have one member of the president's cabinet not attend the State of the Union address, is in case if there is ever, God forbid, an attack, it would basically be our entire federal government that would perish in that attack. And so the reason why we have one individual who does not attend is to ensure that we do have a chain of command, so that even if something that drastic did ever occur, we would still have a chain of command and an individual who can lead the country. So moving on, the president is also the commander-in-chief, so he is the head of our military. He's the top of the chain of the command for the military. And the founding fathers believed in civilian control over the military. They wanted to ensure that the military there would not be a military dictatorship ever, and that the military would always be responsive to the civilian government. Also, it turns out from what we have seen in history that civilian control over government tends to work out better than military control over the government. And so the prime example of this would be in World War II, when the Allied countries had civilian control over the government, to where some of the Axis countries, so for example, Japan, it was basically the military had overwhelming influence over the military. And what we saw happen is that the civilian-controlled militaries performed better than the militaries where the generals were put in charge. The powers are limited by the Constitution. Congress has the sole power to declare war, so not even the president can declare war. When the United States was attacked at Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt had to go to Congress and ask for a declaration of war, which was promptly granted. The president is given a role in war making to ensure a quick response if Congress is adjourned. So once again, if we are attacked during an extremely vulnerable time when Congress is not in session, for example, we still have the president who can respond to that threat. The last time the United States has actually declared war was in World War II against Germany. So we have been involved in several wars since World War II, but World War II was the last time we actually received a declaration of war. So this kind of shows you how expansive the presidential influence in military matters has gone. So unilateral presidential action. So in some areas, the president can take unilateral action without Congress and can act alone. So one of these areas is pardons. Once again, this is something that was recently in the news. President Trump in December issued a couple dozen of pardons that were highly questionable. Even members from his own party were questioning the pardons that he had granted. And many of the pardons that were granted were to individuals who were indicted, convicted or pled guilty to crimes that arose during the Russia investigation by Robert Mueller. And the reason why this is such a questionable pardon is because they're seen as political pardons. So typically, you're supposed to pardon people who have shown good behavior in jail. They aren't related to the president in any way, and that they deserve some type of clemency. And these individuals did not cooperate with law enforcement. They did not show remorse for what they did, but what they were is allies of President Trump. And what makes it even more egregious is that there were a couple of people involved in the Russia investigation who were indicted and who pled guilty and ended up becoming informants for the government. And those individuals did not receive pardons. So Michael Cohen, who was Trump's personal attorney, ended up flipping and testifying against the president. He did not receive a pardon. His campaign manager's deputy, Rick Gates, turned to be an informant as well and supplied information for the government. He was not given a pardon. However, Paul Manafort, Roger Stone, George Papadopoulos. I'm trying to think if there are any others. Michael Flynn. All these individuals were convicted in a court of law or pled guilty, they did not cooperate, they did not show remorse, but they were pardoned. Although I must say, President Trump is not the first president who is generally seen to have abused the presidential pardon. Bill Clinton as well had two quite egregious pardons, in my opinion. One of them was his, I think it was his stepbrother or a brother-in-law, once again, a relative of the president, was pardoned, and then a campaign and party donor was pardoned as well. And so this is a power that is granted to the president, but when it is abused like this, there's always discussion about should we get rid of or should we reform the pardon power, and so that the president can't just pardon whomever they want, but maybe that they can recommend someone for a pardon and then a board oversees it. This is something that is now, once again, due to the pardons that Trump has issued, has come into question. One more person that he pardoned was the father to his son-in-law. So once again, it's in a way, it's someone related to the president who had not shown any signs of remorse, but was a relative of the president because he was the father to the president's son-in-law. There are also executive agreements. So these are done between foreign states. That does not require ratification from Congress. So the president can enter an agreement that is legally binding. However, it does not need to be ratified by Congress, but however, it is not legally binding for the next administration, whereas a treaty signed with the government must be abided by the new administration if it is ratified by Congress. Oftentimes, these executive agreements are the details are often kept secret, which really irks people because it is done to an extent behind closed doors. And especially Americans, we do not like it when there is a lack of transparency in our government. We do want transparency, and most Americans feel that the public should be informed about what is going on in the presidency and in our federal government, although we always understand there are some areas and issues that involve national security that we should be kept kind of in the dark. The president also can issue EOs, or also known as executive orders. So those are policy directives that are issued by presidents that do not require congressional approval. There are limits as to what presidents may or may not issue executive orders on. President Biden has already said that pretty much on his first day of office, he is going to sign up to 100 executive orders. Oftentimes what these executive orders are, so for example, Obama came in and he passed he issued executive orders. Then Trump came in and undid many of those executive orders by executive order. And so now what we're going to see probably happen again, which President-elect Biden has indicated, when he comes into office, he's going to reinstate the executive orders that Obama had put in place that Trump had scrapped. Probably the most notorious executive order ever given was by President Roosevelt in the run-up to our involvement in World War II after Pearl Harbor, which was the Japanese internment, so the internment of Japanese Americans. And typically historically now, this really is seen as one of the worst, or possibly the worst, executive order that has been given. There is also something referred to as executive privilege, which is a right claimed by the president to keep any conversations or records or documents or transcripts confidential from outside scrutiny, especially from Congress. So when President Trump's impeachment process was going on, he basically told all the executive branch employees, every single executive branch employee, he said, do not cooperate. And he said, I can do that because I have executive privilege. My communications with anyone are under executive privilege, and you have to get my authorization if you want access to those, and I am not allowing you authorization. So executive privilege is a thing, but there are limits as to what is and what is not privilege. And that really came to fruition with Watergate, which is what we'll get to on this slide. So here are some limits on presidential powers. So the framers intentionally limited the powers of the president by granting specific powers to Congress and the federal judiciary. Once again, this makes sense when you think about where we came from. We broke away from England, which was a very strong monarch, and so it makes sense that the founding fathers wanted to limit the powers of the presidency. Although Over the 20th century, over the 100 years from 1900 to 2000, the powers of the presidency have expanded quite dramatically. And so, but there are ways to limit the president's powers, or what are referred to as checks and balances, from Congress and the federal judiciary. So the War Powers Resolution, this is a really famous piece of legislation that was passed by Congress in order to restrain the powers of the presidency. It was a law passed over President Nixon's veto. So Nixon vetoed this bill, and then the Democrats and the Republicans worked together in order to override the veto. So that shows you how much support there was by the American people behind this piece of legislation. And it restricted the president's power to maintain troops in combat for more than 60 days without congressional authorization. So once again, it's telling the executive, you can't just deploy our military wherever you want, whenever you want. There are limits. Yes, you may respond in some instances. You may, so for example, airstrikes are kind of really questionable. But presidents have certainly conducted airstrikes. But this is an attempt by Congress to kind of restrain and take back some power that has been given to the presidency. Congress also has the power of impeachment, which is the process of removing a president from office. There are court decisions, so the Supreme Court can rule against decisions made by the president. So, for example, going back to what I was speaking about in the previous slide, executive privilege. So during the Watergate scandal with Richard Nixon, or President Nixon, he had put in tape recorders in the Oval Office, in the White House, to record his conversations with anybody. And he ended up taping himself, basically admitting to criminal behavior. And when it became, when the public was made aware of the existence of these tapes, the independent or special counsel that was investigating Watergate subpoenaed those tapes, saying, I am demanding those tapes. And President Nixon said, no, those are covered by executive privilege. My communications are covered. That is a constitutional right. You do not have the right to subpoena these tapes. And so it ended up being appealed to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, in a historic decision, in a 9-0 decision, ruled against the president's claim of executive privilege and said you do need to hand over those tapes. Additionally, Congress can check the president's powers on the budget. They can check the president's powers on nominations, on treaties and legislation. And like I said, the Supreme Court can rule against the president, even on something, for example, with an executive order, which did happen. So, for example, when President Trump, at the beginning of his term, passed an executive or issued an executive order banning all Muslims from entering the country, that was appealed to the Supreme Court of the United States. And the Supreme Court did rule in part against the president and said, you, like, XYZ cannot be part of the law, but did uphold some parts of the law. So here are pretty much the checks and balances that the branches kind of have on each other. So the executive branch checks the power over the legislative branch by the president can veto laws. He can convene Congress into special session if he wants to pass a piece of legislation. On the judicial branch, the president nominates the Supreme Court justices and federal judges and can also grant pardons and reprieves. We also have legislative branch checks. Legislative branch checks on the powers of the presidency. So the Senate must approve treaties of presidential of treaties and presidential appointments. The House of Representatives has the ability to appropriate money. Congress can override vetoes. Congress can impeach and convict the president and vice president. And then lastly, the judicial branch, the way that they can check the powers of the presidency, or Congress for that matter, is with the ability to rule something as unconstitutional. Although I have said this before when we were covering the Constitution, nowhere in the Constitution does it say that the Supreme Court has the authority to rule on what is or what is not constitutional. They granted themselves that power, and it was accepted by the two other branches in the case of Marbury versus Madison. Okay, so that is everything I have for the executive branch. I know it's not the most expansive lecture, but like I said, time is running out for the end of the semester. So I wanted to give you guys basically the information that I thought was important.